And for that, let's delve a little deeper. Because for the last 25 years, ever since Kargil, and in fact ever since 1998, which is a year before Kargil, when both India and Pakistan became nuclear weapon states, the assumption was that India and Pakistan cannot ever go into an all-out conventional escalation because both countries happen to be nuclear weapon states. What Operation Sindoor has managed to completely call out, obliterate, is this nuclear bluff. That Pakistan always had this false bravado, this false confidence that India, even if it were to respond in the aftermath of these terror attacks, its options will be limited, its scale and scope will be limited because Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Through Operation Sindoor, what India was able to demonstrate, with as many as 9 hits on active terror bases and 11 on air bases of Pakistan, both in Punjab and in Sindh, what it was able to demonstrate in a way was that Pakistan realized by the 10th morning, General Munir realized that he cannot win this war by climbing the escalation ladder, because at every step of the escalation ladder, he was not able to ensure escalation dominance. It was the other side, the Indian side, that was ensuring escalation dominance, and therefore this was a losing battle. There was no point climbing the escalation ladder further. So here's a dispassionate analysis 3 weeks on, once now that the dust has settled and the fog of war has gone away, what Operation Sindoor actually achieved. On the 10th of May 2025, Indian Air Force fighter jets carried out a series of precision strikes deep inside Pakistani territory. These were not isolated or symbolic actions. These were targeted, they were deliberate. India struck not once, but at least 4 times.
Attack hua hai Noor Khan base pe.
Hitting air bases, air defense systems, and critical command and control infrastructure. These strikes marked the unfolding of Operation Sindoor, which was a bold military maneuver which may well redefine the way India thinks about war, deterrence, and counterterrorism. This was not just another retaliatory operation. It was a tectonic shift in strategic thinking. For over 2 decades, every Indian Prime Minister has faced the same dilemma: how to punish Pakistan for cross-border terrorism without escalating it into nuclear conflict. That conundrum has shackled India's responses since Kargil. Limited operations like the 2016 surgical strikes, the 2019 Balakot airstrikes, these were all significant, but they did not alter the strategic calculus. The threat of Pakistan's nuclear arsenal always loomed over any serious retaliation. That is no longer the case. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has done what no Indian Prime Minister before him could do. He has demonstrated that India possesses a spectrum of credible military options below the nuclear threshold, and India is willing to use them. Operation Sindoor has broken the myth that Pakistan's nuclear weapons are a free pass for indulging in terrorism. The Indian Air Force, using a mix of Rafale and Sukhoi 30 MKI fighters, unleashed a devastating combination of Scalp long-range cruise missiles and the BrahMos missile, which is the indigenously developed ballistic missile. The opening strike on the 10th hit Pakistan's Noor Khan Air Base in Chaklala. It's a key hub for the country's Northern Air Command. In the second and final wave of attacks, Indian jets targeted Jacobabad in the Sindh and Bhulari, both further south in Pakistan. But by then, the campaign had already achieved what it set out to do. Pakistan had folded. Its military leadership was scrambling for American mediation and calling for an immediate ceasefire. The turning point came with one phone call. On the morning of the 10th of May, US Secretary of State and acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio spoke directly with Pakistan's Army Chief, General Asim Munir. By that point, Pakistan had lost key air assets and strategic systems. Munir had a sobering reality check. That escalation would only lead to more destruction, and certainly there was no way for him or the Pakistan army to win this war. He requested Rubio to ask India for a ceasefire. Rubio then called up Jaishankar, his counterpart here in India, who then told Rubio that the request has to come not from the Americans or from any other third party. The request has to come directly from the Pakistanis to the Indians. Subsequently, at 3:30 that afternoon on the 10th of May, the Pakistani DGMO called the Indian DGMO and asked for a ceasefire. The scope of Operation Sindoor was staggering. Indian missiles did not just hit terrorist camps or terrorist infrastructure, they dismantled parts of Pakistan's conventional military capacity. This had never happened since 1971. 9 terror locations were struck on the 7th of May. There were loitering munitions used, missiles used from the Army, Air Force and Navy. Scalp and BrahMos missiles targeted these terror hubs, particularly the 2 headquarters, Muridke of the Lashkar and Bahawalpur of the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Subsequently, in the days leading up to the 10th of May, Indian forces also took out a Chinese-made LY-80 air defense system in Lahore by using an Israeli kamikaze Harpy drone. An even more significant strike came when an Indian missile destroyed the HQ-9 system, the Chinese indigenous air defense system in Malir in Karachi. India's S-400 air defense system was deployed in Adampur and was active throughout the operation. It engaged enemy threats on at least a dozen occasions, reportedly even pulling down a Pakistani Saab 2000 airborne early warning aircraft, or AWACS, that was more than 300 kilometers inside Pakistani territory. In addition, India also claims to have destroyed a C-130J medium-lift aircraft, a JF-17, again a Chinese fighter jet, and 2 F-16 fighters. Pakistan, of course, will never verify or independently confirm these claims. The use of the Scalp and the BrahMos in tandem was a strategic choice. It ensured that Pakistani targets were not only hit, but they were obliterated to the ground. The phrase used by the Prime Minister was "mitti mein mila denge," and that's exactly what happened to some of the frontline air bases of Pakistan on the morning of the 10th. This mix of precision and range sent a clear message to Pakistan. India now has the capability and the political intent to hit Pakistan hard without any fear of escalation. And yet, what may have truly shaken Pakistan, and what cannot be publicly ever confirmed, but what was only speculated, is this. There still continue to be, 3 weeks after Operation Sindoor, persistent rumors and reports that India may have targeted the Kirana Hills, which was long believed to be a nuclear storage site in Pakistan. Both the Indian Air Force and the International Atomic Energy Agency have denied this, yet this rumor of India hitting Kirana Hills refuses to die. If India did indeed strike or signal an ability to strike Kirana Hills, it would be an unprecedented move. It would mean that India deliberately signaled to Pakistan, "We know where your nuclear weapons are, and we can hit you." What unfolded over 4 days in the first week of May was unlike anything seen before in India-Pakistan context. For the first time, 2 nuclear-armed nations engaged in a full-fledged conventional exchange of fire, and yet they managed to stop short of nuclear confrontation. This is a landmark moment in global military history. The old assumption that India could not respond militarily to Pakistan without risking nuclear war, that has now been completely upended. That assumption has defined South Asian security for the last 25 years, since both India and Pakistan managed to become nuclear weapon states. Operation Sindoor has now rewritten that. The Modi government has achieved something remarkable. It has created a credible and scalable deterrent model for punishing cross-border terror. It has shown the world that India can strike not just tactically, but strategically, and it can still control the ladder of escalation. Pakistan's reliance on nuclear blackmail has been blunted. This is a new doctrine, and it's not just a military doctrine, it's also a political doctrine. It combines credible intelligence, precision weaponry, calibrated escalation, followed by deft diplomacy. It is called the Modi Doctrine. The risks are still there. The nuclear shadow has not vanished. Pakistan's military will adapt. Non-state actors will seek newer ways to unleash terror. And then India will be forced to escalate too. But the rules of engagement with Operation Sindoor have changed completely. Operation Sindoor has done more than destroy targets. It has reset the balance of power in South Asia. It has reshaped India's response playbook. And most of all, it has told Pakistan and the rest of the world that if provoked, India will respond with strength, with clarity, and without hesitation. This is not just a new chapter in India's security strategy, it's a whole new doctrine. A doctrine that is forged in precision, restraint, and resolve. And its name is underlined in Sindoor. So it's going to be 3 weeks since India launched Operation Sindoor, and now that the dust is settled down on what actually India managed to achieve and what it didn't, let's try and get a military perspective on this. Professor Walter Lodwig is a senior lecturer with the King's College in London. He's written for the Royal United Services Institute last week in what is a comprehensive assessment, a comprehensive paper for what he thinks India's managed to achieve through Operation Sindoor. Thank you very much, Professor, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. So in that assessment that you wrote for RUSI, you say that despite Pakistani tactical successes, India appears to have largely achieved its stated objectives. Can you elaborate for our viewers how you came to that conclusion that India managed to achieve its stated objectives for Operation Sindoor?
Sure. Well, from the outset, the point of the operation was to inflict punishment and degrade facilities connected with transborder terrorism. That was indicated at the start. It was indicated in the Prime Minister's address to the nation after the operation was paused. And so in the first instance, the fact that the Indian Air Force demonstrated an ability to rather precisely strike a range of targets that New Delhi feels are connected with groups that are responsible for various operations in Kashmir demonstrates a rather impressive ability to sort of precisely strike and target. Once a degree of kind of tit-for-tat engagement happened, then we still saw a really impressive ability to penetrate air defense systems and put ordnance on targets on a range of air bases and airfields. And again, the point of the operation was not to necessarily provoke a broader military conflict with Pakistan, but to specifically and precisely target a range of groups who've been responsible for attacks on India, which was achieved.
But so that happened on the 7th with the initial phase of Operation Sindoor. Obviously, like you said, the stated objective was to hit these terror hideouts, these launch pads, these headquarters of Lashkar and Jaish, etc. But then Pakistan subsequently escalated it, particularly on the night between the 9th and the 10th, with not just drone strikes, but missile strikes and so on. And then India retaliated, taking out at least 11 Pakistani air bases. How was that tactically different from anything you've seen in the last 25 years between these two countries?
Well, first of all, the scope of the operation. So we've seen an evolution where in the 1999 Kargil War, there was such a concern about even broaching the line of control in Kashmir that the Indian Air Force, when it was carrying out strikes against Pakistani infantry that had seized the heights, was coming in at very extreme angles just to make sure they didn't accidentally fly across the LOC. We then saw in 2016 the surgical strike, an evolution in more publicity than actual fact, in the sense that these kinds of cross-border raids had been going on before, but the fact that it was so celebrated. And then Balakot in 2019 was seen as a real watershed, because this was, first off, the use of air power, and it was into Pakistan proper. Now, to be fair, it was barely across the border into KPK, but nevertheless, this was outside of Kashmir. So this was seen as a very important difference. Now, in 2025, we see operations going across, the breadth of both countries. This is not fighting simply in Kashmir. This is striking targets, both terrorist infrastructure and then eventually military in both countries proper, right, into the Punjab, which is the heartland of Pakistan. And then we haven't seen these kinds of air engagements really between the two sides since 1971. And to be perfectly frank, the world hasn't seen them ever. This is the first time that we have two countries that have nuclear weapons that have engaged in these kinds of strikes on each other. So this is very new, not just in the context of South Asian security, but in terms of our academic study of international relations, nuclear weapons, limited warfare, and so forth.
I also want to sort of press and want you to elaborate on something else that you've written in that analysis piece for RUSI, where you say Operation Sindoor challenges two long-standing assumptions in Islamabad. One, that nuclear threats would deter Indian military action, and two, that terrorism occupies a separate category from conventional conflict. How has it challenged, if not changed, those two assumptions?
Well, the first is that it's now clear that New Delhi's policy is going to be to retaliate against terrorist attacks that they presume are linked to agents of the Pakistani state with large-scale military force. So this isn't going to be a question of simply sending small cross-border raids or localized use of force, that this could result in much more general strikes. So that's, on the one hand, a breaking down of the barrier between the subconventional and the conventional. And the second is there's been a long-held presumption that the possession of nuclear weapons would prevent India from trying to use military force on a large scale. Now, the fact of the matter is the history of nuclear weapons show us there's far too many cases where even non-nuclear states felt comfortable and confident attacking nuclear-armed states, that there really shouldn't have been a belief that this would be a massive deterrent. But because of the obscurity over where Pakistan's red lines may actually lie, how much pressure they might feel, again, there was a sense among scholars and observers of South Asian security issues that this would impose significant hesitation in the minds of Indian decision makers.
But tell me, if India is showing and demonstrably showing through Operation Sindoor and even prior to that there are tangible military options, conventional military options below the nuclear threshold, does that not also mean that the next time there is an escalation, the rungs of escalation that need to be climbed before you get to the nuclear rung, that gets shortened much more?
Potentially, and that becomes a real question and concern, because as we've seen in the chronology I laid out from 2016 through 2019 through today, each time, I think, reestablishes a new expectation in the minds of Indian policymakers and, quite frankly, the Indian public about what is an appropriate reaction. So, the scale of operations we saw this year will probably be what everyone will expect the government to do at a minimum, should there be a future attack. And this does eventually push us up towards that nuclear rung. Now, again, this operation and Pakistan's responses and the fact that both sides carried them out in a relatively restrained and precise way suggests there's probably more space there than many analysts and scholars have presumed in the past. But you're right to point out this concern that the space is ultimately finite, even if there's more space there than we thought.
But what about the cost it imposes on the enemy? Has India, through its actions, and you also mentioned, now the non-distinction between the non-state actors and the state actors, has it, through its actions, imposed enough of a cost on the state actors? Because let's be honest, they are the ones who are driving this. Has it imposed enough of a cost on the state actors to go back to the drawing board in Pakistan and rethink whether or not this business of asymmetric warfare is worth the cost of carrying out against India?
Well, unfortunately, it's a question that we can't answer at this point in time. The hopeful answer would be yes, would be that this would lead to a realization that this is a self-destructive policy, that this is a policy that a country that's on its 25th IMF bailout does not need. A prolonged military standoff or clash with India is certainly not in the interest of the Pakistan economy or its long-term trajectory. So one would hope so. However, the understandings of kind of the endemic belief system within the Pakistani military and the image of India as the eternal enemy, whether these kinds of strikes will be able to shift that, I think, is an open question. And unfortunately, it's something we'll only be able to determine, in time.
And one final question. This was towards the end of Operation Sindoor, which was paused. It's not a conclusion. But the decision to call for the ceasefire, the decision to announce the ceasefire, and the manner in which it came about, as you said, India was dominating each of these escalation rungs. And then suddenly, at a time when at least the popular feeling seemed to be that you've reached a stage where you can impose significant costs on Pakistan, on the enemy, on the state actors of Pakistan, India suddenly says, okay, the DGMO called and we have agreed to a ceasefire. And the feeling here was that Trump and the US and the Trump administration had a role to play, even though the government of India vehemently denies that. How does that change the calculus for, God forbid, the next escalation?
Well, I think this is where you go back and you look at the language used by the prime minister. And I think it was very precise and very focused in, again, reminding what the initial mission was, right? It was not a general conflict with Pakistan. It was about specifically targeting groups. And I think, the government made a very specific point of highlighting that, because that was the objective in the first place. So if the strikes had taken place the first night and there had been no significant response on the part of the Pakistani military, I think it would have been left there. Yeah. It would not have gone forward. And so I think one of the ways in which the government is trying to control escalation and try to ensure that should this policy remain in place, and it have to be used again, that it doesn't lead to an out-of-control escalation, is being very specific about what the objectives are. And even in the face of public opinion, which might be more forward-leaning and more hawkish than the government is attempting to be itself.
All right, Professor Walter Lodwick, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Thank you. All right, let's shift focus to what's happening in the neighborhood. Political uncertainty and growing discontent is staring Bangladesh in the face. The interim government led by Professor Mohammad Yunus is facing fire from all sides. Government employees have been protesting for a fourth consecutive day today. They're demanding the repeal of what is called the Public Service Ordinance 2025. Now, this was passed quite hastily a few days ago. It has basically halted all administrative functions at the Bangladesh Secretariat and barred any outsiders from entering. Now, it's not just government employees. Primary school teachers have also joined the public sector workers in these protests against the interim government. Now, this ordinance basically allows the administration of Professor Yunus, the interim administration, to dismiss any public servant for what they deem as misconduct without due process. Uncertainties also deepened last week after a top student leader said that Professor Yunus had said to the all-parties meeting that he's willing to step down if political parties cannot agree on an election timeline. But the biggest problem for Professor Yunus seems to be that he's on a collision course with a real power center in Bangladesh, and that is the army chief. Bangladesh's army chief held a press conference last week, General Waqar-ur-Zaman, who added pressure on Professor Yunus's interim regime by saying that calling for elections has to be held as early as later this year. The deadline has been given as December 2025, which is a clear departure or a clear divergence from Professor Yunus's own timeline, which is that he feels he has a year's time up until June of next year to hold these elections. Now, adding to Yunus's woes is the allegation that his administration is not doing enough to keep radicals behind bars. Bangladesh's Supreme Court has overturned the conviction of Azharul Islam. He's a senior leader of the Jamaat-e-Islami. Azharul Islam is a top commander of the Al-Badr during the 1971 Liberation War. He was convicted for a brutal murder, acts of mass rape, looting, and collaborating directly with the Pakistani military to crush the independence movement. Islam, who's been in custody since 2012, was one of the 6 senior political figures convicted during Hasina's rule in the protest against the independence movement that happened back in the 1970s.
One thing is very clear in Bangladesh, that a section of people, they are hugely unhappy with Mohammad Yunus' performance. BNP today also have raised the issue that even after such a huge meeting in Saturday, where they express their views on what can be done now, what are the demands which they raised have not been fulfilled. Till now, Mohammad Yunus has not stated that whether the election will take place on December or not. Instead of that, they have said that they are looking for the election till next year, June. Now, that will be very late. BNP today has again stressed that any delay in election will lead to anarchy. So, BNP clearly unhappy with whatever the interim government is doing. On the other hand, amidst all this uncertainty and in a volatile situation, Mohammad Yunus will be leaving for Japan. He is going to Japan and there he has certain meetings. But when the entire country is in such a volatile and uncertain condition, he is leaving from his country to Japan. That is also a question that has been raised by certain leaders and certain group of peoples out there.
Mohibul Hassan Chaudhry Naufal is a former Bangladeshi minister in the Sheikh Hasina government. He's now joining me from an undisclosed location. Thank you very much, Mr. Chaudhry, for speaking with us. What is going on in Bangladesh? Because from the pictures that we can see, there seems to be an open war going on between the army chief, General Zaman, the head of the interim government, Professor Mohammad Yunus. Many are saying that, the fundamental point of difference is why is the interim government not calling for elections soon enough? Why are they not agreeing to a timeline which was agreed upon that elections will be held before the end of this year? Are things going to get to a point where Professor Yunus will be forced to either hold elections or he will be forced out of office?
First of all, we have to understand how Mr. Yunus has come to this position. He had political ambition in the past, which had failed, and subsequently he had tried to dislodge democratically elected governments in the past by writing to his foreign backers. And this is for the first time in his life, he has found an opportunity to get state power and do what he thinks is right for the nation. The man has no mandate, neither from the public nor from the political parties. They have claimed that the army chief had invited him to take up the position of chief advisor, although the constitution does not have any provision for the position of chief advisor. They had claimed that there was some kind of presidential reference to the Supreme Court, which was heard by the full bench of the court, and this was the decision. None of this was eventually shown to the public, although petitions after petitions were filed to the court to show whether there was any judicial instruction or order. So, as he does not have any mandate, neither legal nor political, he's trying to create a constitutional anarchy. And one of the ways that he is trying to do this is by discussing in a never-ending manner matters on which he has no expertise nor mandate, such as constitutional reform, institutional reform, etc. Now, he's claiming that his mandate is from the revolution, the quote-unquote upheaval, the revolution. And so he's just simply buying time to give his party some space to establish that party in the political sphere.
But Mr. Chaudhry, you talk about, Mr. Yunus not having any kind of mandate, political or constitutional. But what about the mandate of the army chief, who again last week in a press conference said that it is going to be absolutely essential, quintessential, that elections need to be held by the timeline that was agreed upon, which is the end of the year. And then the next day, I think Professor Yunus met with all the political parties and he said that he can't follow that timeline and that he wants to extend that timeline till June of next year. So what is the army chief's role in what is clearly and should be a political process?
See, army chief represents an institution. And when he took oath as the chief of the armed forces, his oath was to uphold the constitution. The constitution has not been suspended. Without suspending the constitution, they are now talking about reforming the constitution, changing the constitution, etc. So it is the army chief's constitutional duty to uphold the constitution. And as per the constitution, the provision of this particular type of government that we have now, the interim government, does not exist. Therefore, it is on the army chief that the country is brought under a political leadership and election be held. So obviously, from his constitutional position, he has spoken about the need for a political government and elections. So it is actually his constitutional duty that he is demanding this election from. Now, Mr. Yunus has no constitutional obligation. He has no political obligation, and therefore he can just simply say that reform is his first agenda, and he can think about think about election only after the so-called reforms that he's after.
But you know, the curious thing for all our viewers here in India is, why has Mr. Yunus taken such an anti-India position on every issue? I mean, he talked about India's northeastern states being landlocked. That you know, it's almost like rolling out the red carpet for China to come and invest in Bangladesh. There is now again a new controversy that's erupted around the St. Martin Island. It seems like certainly the view in Delhi seems to be that Mr. Yunus is very, very inimical to India and India's interests. How does that help him politically at all?
You see, he's an opportunist. He's trying to play the tune of the fanatic Islamist parties. Now, even the liberal Islamist parties did not have such anti-India stance in politics before. Mr. Yunus is only trying to beef up a fictitious anti-India sentiment in the country in order to sort of give excuse to the public that India is the reason why he can't do what he wants to do. Now, India has no role right now inside Bangladesh which stops him from holding the election. But it is just an excuse that we've seen this in the past. He's just being the new Jinnah, I guess, where he's just trying to play the religion card. Now, the man himself is not, from what we know from his public life, is not a religious man at all. We've never seen him in any kind of religious gathering ever in his life. Now, for the first time, he's trying to sort of play that Islam card, the Muslim card. Now he's the savior of the fanatical parties. So and all the militants who had been released from the prison after the fall of the political government, they all used to sort of be part of staunchly anti-India political fundamentalist parties, some of which were banned.
Mr. Mobil Chaudhary, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. He's a former minister in the Sheikh Hasina government joining us, and I think he's given us a big headline. Mr. Yunus is trying to be Islamist in his politics. Clearly, he doesn't believe that in an individual capacity, at least certainly his career doesn't bear that out, but he's trying to use this Islamist politics because, as Mr. Chaudhary said, in his words, that maybe Mr. Yunus wants to be the new Jinnah. All right, let's now move on to the other big story. This is a huge announcement, a significant one regarding the fighter jet program of the Indian Defence Forces. Now, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has approved the development of what is called the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, or AMCA, India's first fifth-generation stealth fighter jet. This ambitious project aims to enhance India's air power with a medium-weight, deep penetration fighter jet, which features advanced stealth capabilities. Now, what's interesting is that project will also have equal opportunities both for the private and public sector. The need for India to have its own fifth-generation fighter jet, it cannot be overstated. India faces sophisticated air forces from neighboring countries, whether it is China, whether it is even Pakistan, the Pakistan Air Force. China, in fact, is developing an advanced fifth-generation fighter and has even now promised, in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, to provide those fifth-generation fighters to the Pakistan Air Force. In fact, potentially these fifth-generation fighters, whether the J-20 or the J-31 or the J-35, which China is developing, if it manages to give these fifth-generation fighters to Pakistan, that would enhance the threat that India's air superiority faces, and that is necessitating a fifth-generation fighter to maintain the strategic edge. Fifth-generation fighters with low observable technology reduce radar detection, enabling India to conduct covert operations and also to penetrate advanced enemy air defenses. Advanced avionics, sensor fusions, and network-centric warfare capabilities in fifth-generation fighters provide superior situational awareness, and that is critical for modern-day combat. A fifth-generation fighter strengthens India's deterrence posture as well, which is key to maintaining regional power balance. Projects like the AMCA align with India's self-reliance initiatives, Atmanirbharta in defense, and not to forget, with the fourth-generation fighters like the Sukhoi 30 MKI, which is an aging fleet, the fifth-generation platform ensures that the Indian Air Force remains as competitive against evolving global military tech.
In a major push to India's Atmanirbharta approach in the defense sector, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has approved the execution model of AMCA program. AMCA program is India's 5th generation fighter aircraft program, which stands for Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. Till now, we have seen all the developments in papers, documents and the news. But now the development will start on ground, because we are expecting an expression of interest in some days from now. It has been made very clear that this program, and in fact the development, will not be limited to public sector undertakings only. This time, it can be an equal opportunity for both private industry and public sector undertakings. In fact, there can be a joint venture that would be working for the development of AMCA aircraft. We know that how in several exhibitions we have seen the prototype model and in fact the developments that have happened till now. The prototype, of course, is expected by 2027 and the actual aircraft and the deliveries are expected by 2036.
Well, it's not just that. India is also now exploring the possibility of a potential partnership with the French aerospace and defense major Safran to enhance its engine-making capabilities for the Indian Air Force. Remember, the Air Force is trying to develop, the HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, is trying to develop its next-generation Tejas Light Combat Aircraft Mark II, or MK2. The move after Operation Sindoor is aimed at broadening India's options to enable faster indigenous production of these fighter jets. The US-based General Electric Aerospace, GE Aerospace, had entered into a technology transfer for supplying engines for the IAF Tejas Mark II fighters. In fact, the 404 engines were being provided for the Mark I fighter, but for the Mark II, it was going to be the 414 GE jet engine transfer of technology, but there's been massive delays for that transfer of technology, as a result of which the delivery timelines for the Tejas Mark II have been badly affected, and that, of course, is leading to a serious sort of impediment in the IAF's fleet upgradation timeline. Nalin Mehta, managing editor of Money Control, has broken that story, and here he delves a little deeper into what this means, coming as it does in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor, and also coming as it does with the Trump White House wanting India to buy more American defense equipment.
This move is hugely significant given that it has come after Operation Sindoor. As we are reporting in Money Control, there are 3 or 4 reasons for this shift of India looking at a possible partnership with Safran, the French aerospace and defense major. The first is that after Operation Sindoor, India needs on priority a much larger number of jets. The Air Force squadron size is about 31, it needs to go to 42. There is now an imperative and an urgency to ensure that number gets added up very fast. The Prime Minister has said very clearly that Operation Sindoor is not over, that India reserves the right to hit back if there is another terror attack and there is a new normal. The second, I think, is that India is also looking at which is a reliable partner. So far, for Tejas MK version and the MK1 version, the partner has been GE, which has been supplying the engine so far. There were three orders so far. The first one was in 2009-2010, which was for 40 aircraft. Then for another 83 aircraft, which was signed in 2001, which again was to be powered by GE. The first of those aircraft were to have been in service by middle of 2024, but the engines didn't come. The first of those engines, 97 engines in all, have now only been delivered to Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, and there will be a delayed timeline for that. So what defense sources are telling us at Money Control is that India is looking at all options on the table. India is looking at seeing every possibility and looking for ways to significantly speeden up the process of getting more and more indigenous aircraft on the manufacturing line and in service. So this is also linked to concerns over technology of transfer and the speed of that. The GE engines have been delayed over concerns over technology of transfer too, and have also featured in trade talks and so on. So the fact that India looks at Safran now as a possibility for co-development, for options of enhancing its engine making capacity, or for engines being produced here and so on, it increases the possibilities India has, but also becomes a leverage with GE as well.
And finally, US President Donald Trump has made his frustration against Vladimir Putin very clear. Even as tit-for-tat drone attacks are continuing, major Ukrainian cities have been targeted. Russia in turn blames Ukraine and Europe for what it calls an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. So from saying that he will end the war in 24 hours to now saying that Vladimir Putin has gone crazy, it's Trump who seems to have come full circle.
The Oval Office, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine totally settled. I'll have it done in 24 hours.
When Donald Trump declared with his trademark bravado that he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours if he's elected president again, few people took him seriously. Now he's finding out that he's all by himself. 4 months into playing global peacemaker, it is increasingly clear that even Trump might find it difficult to play down the hype. Unfortunately for Trump, the war in Ukraine is not a boardroom deal. It is Vladimir Putin's war, and it will only end on his terms, at his time, and almost certainly it will end on the battlefield. The US president has been dangling the possibility of an off-ramp to Russia, promising he's able to work out a deal with Putin. Yet, while Trump has been busy trying to cobble together a ceasefire, Russia, at the same time, has only escalated its attacks on Ukraine. These last few weeks, particularly in the last week or so, has been an intense spike in both air and missile strikes over Ukraine, particularly its biggest cities, including Kiev and Kharkiv. Civilians have been killed, infrastructure has been shattered, and this is clearly no de-escalation. This is only acceleration. Why then does Trump persist with his diplomatic mirage? Now, part of the answer lies in Trump's transactional worldview, one that conflates statecraft with deal-making. But Russia's war in Ukraine is not a business dispute. It is an imperial project. Putin is not a chief executive officer who's looking for a graceful exit from this war. He is a modern-day version of a Russian czar who is obsessed with Russia's legacy and his own legacy. He wants to restore Russia's historic motherland, and he wants to break the Western-controlled international order. There is no incentive for Putin to agree to a ceasefire which stops short of full military victory. And he doesn't see victory in diplomatic terms. Victory can only come in military terms. The fundamental problem with Trump's strategy is a fatal misreading of Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin has no appetite for a negotiated settlement because the Kremlin feels that both time and blood are assets. It's on their side, on the Russian side, not on the Ukrainian side. Every day that Russia continues to pound Ukrainian cities, it chips away at Ukraine's energy, its manpower, and its morale. And at the same time, Western political support will also start to fray. Moscow believes that the tide of time will eventually tilt its way. Putin does not want a frozen conflict under a Western brokered deal. He wants a frozen peace on his terms, on Russian terms, one that cements his battlefield gains and establishes Russia's dominance over Ukraine. In effect, what he wants is Ukraine to surrender by exhaustion, if not by diplomacy. The reason Putin is loath to accepting any ceasefire is simple, because he believes that Russia can still win on the battlefield. Ukrainian counteroffensives have stalled, Western weapon shipments seem to be slowing down, and within Russia, the war is now being normalized. It's portrayed as a righteous struggle for national survival. Putin's calculation is rooted in the belief that time and the balance of military power are both on Russia's side. Despite heavy losses, Russian forces have made significant gains in eastern Ukraine, while Western support for Kiev is showing signs of fatigue. By intensifying attacks on some of the major Ukrainian cities right now, Putin is hoping to break Ukrainian resistance and force the West to accept the new military reality on the ground. The Kremlin's repeated insistence that root causes must be addressed before a ceasefire can be announced, that is just diplomatic smoke and mirrors. What Russia wants is very clear. It wants recognition of its territorial gains, which means 20% of Ukraine will have to be given up to Russia, a weakened and neutralized Ukraine, no question of NATO membership ever, and of course an end to Western sanctions on Russia. None of these are remotely acceptable to Kyiv. But above all, this is not a war that Putin can afford to end with ambiguity. A ceasefire now, with no clear-cut Russian victory, would be seen as a defeat. In fact, in Putin's worldview, he would think that this could embolden internal dissent in Russia. This would embolden those factions who may want to get back at him. For Putin, a negotiated settlement is not just unacceptable, it could be politically dangerous. He could be thrown out of power if he were to accept a ceasefire. He has tied his own legitimacy and Russia's legitimacy to the end of this war. He cannot walk away from this war without something tangible to show for. And this explains why the stepped-up attacks on Kyiv and other cities. It also explains the strategic shift towards high-impact, high-visibility strikes which are designed to terrorize Ukraine's population. One of the more chilling developments in recent days was the drone attack in Russia's Kursk region, which coincided with President Putin visiting a military installation there. Russian intelligence sources claim it was an attempted assassination, an effort to target Putin directly while he was in the Kursk area. Now, whether or not this was a genuine attempt on Putin's life, the symbolism has not been lost on Moscow. For the Kremlin, it reinforces the narrative that the West and Ukraine are not just fighting Russia, they are targeting Putin personally. He is in the crosshairs. They want him gone. They want him eliminated, and they will go to any lengths to assassinate him. That just hardens the Russian position. If ever there was a window for a ceasefire, it was likely slammed shut with that drone strike that happened over the weekend. In Russian eyes, this is now a total war. It's not just a territorial war, it is an existential war. And in such a war, the only acceptable endgame is unconditional victory on the battlefield. Trump, ever the deal maker, is attempting to frame this war as a misunderstanding that can be fixed by the right blend of pressure and persuasion. So Trump's desperate tweets and posts and sound bites that he gave over the weekend basically stem from a fundamental misreading of Vladimir Putin. That's why Trump has been saying that he doesn't know what has gone wrong with Putin. He seems hell-bent on bombing the hell out of Ukraine. A month ago, he even posted on Truth Social, desperately pleading with Vladimir, referring to Putin by his first name. Trump is hoping that eventually better sense will prevail on Putin. But that is not Putin's endgame. Trump's notion that he can get Putin and Zelensky to sit down and hammer out a beautiful agreement, it ignores the nature of this conflict itself. This is not a border dispute. This is not even about NATO anymore. It's a clash between two different visions of Europe. One, which is represented by the likes of France and Germany and the UK, where they put out values of freedom and democracy. The other, which they claim is espoused by the likes of Putin and Viktor Orban and others, which is authoritarian and revisionist. Putin, they claim, sees himself not as a negotiator, but a conqueror. Putin's inspiration is not Yalta at the end of World War II, where the great powers sat down and signed a victory agreement. His inspiration, his role model, is Peter the Great, the last Russian Tsar. What lies ahead, therefore, in Putin's worldview is not a Trump-brokered grand bargain. What Putin wants is a grim and grinding reality, which is a military victory for Russia in at least the fifth of Ukraine that it now controls. The likeliest future in Ukraine is that of a frozen peace. And we've seen this elsewhere. We've seen this in the 1950s at the end of the Korean War, where the Korean Peninsula, the open war that happened between North and South Korea, ended. But it's been decades, generations really, of hostility, militarization, and instability, and it continues to this day. So what you're going to get in Ukraine most likely is going to be an armistice similar to what we have between the two Koreas. Ukraine, which is battered and bloodied, will have no choice but to retreat. Russia, having seized swathes of east and south of Ukraine, will fortify its hold there. Diplomatic recognition may not come. The United Nations may not recognize that territory as Russian, but ultimately what Putin wants is he will have control of the ground in eastern Ukraine. There will be no handshake, no signing ceremony, no instrument of surrender, just a cold pause, because that's what Putin wants. He doesn't want peace, he wants control. Not negotiations, but capitulation. And until he achieves it, Putin is not going to stop.
Co-presented by This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Enhancing India's indigenous defense capabilities and fostering a robust domestic aerospace industrial ecosystem, the Defense Ministry and the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has confirmed the approval of the Advanced Multi-Combat Aircraft program. The Aeronautical Development Agency is set to execute this program through industry partnership. There is going to be a role of private players in this as well. This is important because it is a move towards harnessing the indigenous expertise, capability and capacity to develop the AMCA prototype. It will be a major milestone towards Atmanirbharta in the aerospace sector. This will also give equal opportunities to private and public sectors on a competitive basis. There is going to be soon a fifth generation fighter jet that India is going to be indigenously producing.
In a major push to India's Atmanirbharta approach in the defense sector, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has approved the execution model of AMCA program. AMCA program is India's fifth generation fighter aircraft program, which stands for Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. Till now, we have seen all the developments in papers, documents and the news. But now the development will start on ground because we are expecting an expression of interest in some days from now. It has been made very clear that this program and in fact the development will not be limited to public sector undertakings only. This time it can be an equal opportunity for both private industry and public sector undertakings. In fact, there can be a joint venture that would be working for the development of AMCA aircraft. We know that how in several exhibitions we have seen the prototype model and in fact the developments that have happened till now. The prototype of course is expected by 2027 and the actual aircraft and the deliveries are expected by 2036. We know that how DRDO is the lead agency and ADA, which is an arm of DRDO, is working on the entire project. Till now, officials say that timelines are on track and by 2036 we can expect that AMCA would be a reality. And in fact, the prototype will be seen by 2027. But having seen Sindoor, in fact the Operation Sindoor, we know that how critical and important this project is going to be for Indian Armed Forces. We know that how a fifth generation aircraft is something that Indian Armed Forces need at this point in time. And given the fact that Indian Air Force as of now have aircraft like Rafale, Su-30 MKI and Mirage, so they of course need a fifth generation fighter aircraft, and having one indigenous aircraft is an advantage in itself. At this point in time, while CCS has already approved the execution, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh has further approved, and now it will be formalized that how public sector undertakings and private entities are coming together to work on the development of this AMCA program.
Viewers, watch tonight as we break it all down for you. The time has come to reveal it all, viewers. The time has come to tell all of you, all patriotic Indians who take pride in the achievements of our armed forces, in the prowess of our armed forces, the exact nature of the devastation that we have inflicted upon Pakistan. Now, viewers, why are we doing